The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that pressed down on Camille's shoulders until it felt hard to breathe. She stood at the defendant's table, wrists shackled in cold steel cuffs that clinked every time she shifted nervously. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on the judge, a man who had already made up his mind about her before she even stepped into the room. His name was Judge Randall, and his reputation stretched far beyond the courthouse walls. He was strict, uncompromising, and, as many quietly admitted in hushed tones, he carried the old poison of prejudice with him wherever he went. Camille's chest rose and fell quickly as she glanced at the small audience. A few strangers sat in the gallery, watching her as if she were some kind of spectacle. None of them knew her, none of them knew the truth. They didn't know about her kids waiting at home with her sister, confused about why their mother hadn't come back last night. They didn't know she had never stolen a thing in her life, let alone attacked anyone. They didn't know that the charges had been fabricated by a wealthy local family, people with enough money and power to twist a story until it looked like fact. Her lawyer, a tired public defender juggling too many cases, cleared his throat and tried to speak. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. There is no substantial evidence." Judge Randall raised one wrinkled hand, cutting him off as though brushing away a fly. His expression was stern, lips pressed into a thin line that already told the story of how little he cared. "I've heard enough," he said, his voice echoing across the courtroom. "The jury has spoken, and I see no reason to delay the inevitable." Camille felt her stomach drop. The trial had been a farce, rushed and riddled with objections that went nowhere. Witnesses against her had lied confidently, and the jury had looked away when she tried to meet their eyes. It had been clear from the beginning that the verdict was written before the trial even began. She was just a character in a script she had no chance of rewriting. Her lawyer tried again, voice desperate now. "Your Honor, at least allow me to file an appeal." "I said enough," Judge Randall thundered, slamming his palm against the wooden bench. The sound made Camille flinch, her chains rattling against each other. This city is tired of criminals like her. Tired of seeing people like her flood our courts with excuses and lies. The law demands order, and I intend to give it. Camille's cheeks burned as the words sank in. People like her. He hadn't even hidden it. The venom was plain, laced into every syllable. Her throat tightened as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I hereby sentence you, Camille Harris, to life in prison without the possibility of parole," the judge declared, his voice final and merciless. "May this serve as a message to others who think they can poison this city with their crimes." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, splitting the silence like thunder. The sound echoed in Camille's ears, louder than her own heartbeat. She thought of her children again. Their small hands, their laughter, the way they called her, "Mommy," when they needed comfort. She thought of her husband, away on business, unaware of the storm that had swallowed her whole. What would happen to them now? Who would protect them if she was locked away for the rest of her life? Gasps rippled through the gallery. A few people muttered under their breath, but no one stood up for her. No one challenged the injustice hanging thick in the air. The bailiff moved forward, reaching for her arm. Camille's legs trembled as she tried to steady herself, every step toward the holding cell feeling heavier than the last. Still, she kept her head high. Inside, grief threatened to crush her, but a small, stubborn ember of defiance refused to go out. She hadn't done what they accused her of, and though this judge had stolen her freedom with a stroke of arrogance and prejudice, something told her this wasn't the end of her story. As the door to the holding area opened, Camille stole one last glance at the judge. He didn't look at her as a human being, only as a case closed, another number on his docket. His face was smug, satisfied. But Camille whispered silently to herself, a promise no one else could hear. "You will not bury me here. Not like this." The cuffs dug into her wrists as the bailiff led her away, the weight of injustice pressing harder than the chains themselves. Somewhere beyond these walls, her children still believed their mother would come home. And though the judge had written her fate with prejudice instead of justice, Camille clung to that belief too, like a lifeline in the dark. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the polished marble floor, cutting through the courtroom's restless whispers like a drumbeat. The doors swung open with sudden force, and every head turned at once. The man who entered carried with him an air of authority so commanding that even the bailiff froze mid-step. His stride was measured but deliberate, his sharp navy suit perfectly pressed, his shoulders squared as if he had stepped out of a painting of leadership itself. Camille's breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred with tears, but even through the haze she knew that walk, that silhouette. Jonathan, her husband, the mayor of the city. Reporters who had been lounging with boredom only minutes ago now leapt to their feet, the room alive with the frantic clicking of camera shutters. Flashes lit the walls like lightning, illuminating the confusion written across Judge Randall's face. He adjusted his glasses nervously, his self-assured composure cracking for the first time that morning. Jonathan's gaze never wavered. He didn't acknowledge the cameras or the whispers building into a tidal wave. He looked only at Camille. And in that moment, the cold courtroom seemed to shift, warmed by something fierce and unshakable. She had stood there moments ago, sentenced to life, her spirit trembling beneath the weight of injustice, but now, with his presence, the air was charged with a different kind of power. The mayor walked straight past the bailiff, past the stunned clerk, ignoring the judge's sharp, stammered protest. "Mr. Mayor, this is highly irregular." Jonathan raised one hand, not in anger, but in a gesture that silenced the entire room. His voice followed, deep and steady, cutting through the chaos. "The only thing irregular here is the grotesque excuse for justice that I've just witnessed." Gasps erupted from the gallery. Camille's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief. He wasn't supposed to be here. She hadn't told him, hadn't wanted to burden him with the trial, certain that the truth would shine through on its own. But somehow he knew. Jonathan stepped directly to her side. He didn't ask permission. He didn't hesitate. His hand reached out, gently clasping hers, even though the steel cuffs dug between their palms. The warmth of his grip steadied her, reminded her that she wasn't alone in this fight. She felt the tremor of his rage in the strength of his hold, but also the unspoken vow that he would not let her disappear into the shadows of a broken system. The judge shifted uncomfortably, his gavel clutched tightly as though it could reassert his authority. "Mr. Mayor, this proceeding is closed. You have no right." "No right." Jonathan's voice boomed louder, drowning out the judge's protests. "You've just stripped a woman of her freedom without evidence, without fairness, without dignity. You've turned this courtroom into a stage for your own bias." His tone was laced with steel, each word a hammer striking at the cracks in the judge's facade. The reporters were nearly climbing over one another now, shouting questions, capturing every second. "Mr. Mayor, is she your wife? Did you know about the charges? What will happen next?" Jonathan ignored them all. He turned slightly so that the cameras had a clear view of him standing beside Camille, their hands intertwined. "Let the record show," he declared, his voice carrying to the farthest corner of the room, "that the woman you have sentenced so carelessly, so cruelly, is not just another name on your docket. She is my wife. She is the first lady of this city. And today, the people will see the corruption in this courtroom for exactly what it is." The room exploded with noise. Journalists shouted into their recorders, cell phones buzzed as news broke in real time, and the judge's face turned a furious shade of red. He tried to slam his gavel again, but the sound was lost in the chaos. Camille, overwhelmed, felt her knees weaken. Yet standing there with Jonathan's hand gripping hers, she found her strength again. For the first time in weeks, she felt the crushing weight on her chest lift, if only slightly. His presence had changed everything. He wasn't just here to stand by her side. He was here to fight, to expose, to tear down the injustice that had nearly destroyed her life. And as the flashes continued and the judge sputtered helplessly, Camille realized this was bigger than her. This wasn't only her trial anymore. This was the beginning of a reckoning, one that could unravel the quiet power games that had crushed countless others before her. Her husband turned his head just enough to whisper, his voice low so only she could hear, "They thought they could bury you. They didn't know who they were really dealing with. Not anymore." Camille squeezed his hand in return, her tears finally falling freely. This was far from over, but for the first time since the nightmare began, hope surged through her veins. Jonathan had walked into that courtroom like a storm, and now nothing, not even Judge Randall, would be able to silence the truth. The courtroom had dissolved into chaos, voices clashing like waves in a storm. Reporters shouted over one another, some already live streaming the moment, their microphones thrust forward as if they could capture the very heartbeat of the scandal unraveling before them. The bailiff barked for order, his voice drowned out by the relentless hum of cameras snapping and phones ringing. Yet amid the noise, Jonathan's presence carved out a sphere of clarity. He stood tall, his hand still locked with Camille's, as though daring anyone to separate them. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly, his composure cracking with every strike. "Order. I demand order in this court." His voice was desperate now, lacking the iron certainty he'd brandished earlier when sentencing Camille. The gavel, once a weapon of authority, sounded small, almost pitiful against the roar of the crowd. His eyes darted nervously from the cameras to Jonathan, as though calculating how quickly his carefully built fortress of control was collapsing. Jonathan's voice cut through the noise, firm and deliberate. "No, Your Honor. What this court demands is accountability." The words hung heavy in the air. Even those who had doubted Camille only moments earlier now leaned forward, their curiosity sharpened by the mayor's conviction. He turned his gaze toward the reporters, ensuring every camera caught his expression, not one of desperation, but of righteous fury. "You all saw it," Jonathan continued, his tone ringing with certainty. "A judge who silenced the defense. A trial with fabricated evidence. A sentence handed down not by justice, but by prejudice. My wife was not given her day in court, she was given a performance of power." The journalists seized on his words, repeating them aloud into recorders, scribbling furiously into notepads. The phrase, "performance of power," rippled through the crowd like sparks on dry grass, already taking root as the narrative of the day. The judge tried to push back, though his voice trembled. "Mr. Mayor, this is highly inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" Jonathan's eyes flashed, his voice rising again. "What's inappropriate is condemning an innocent mother to die in prison without a shred of credible proof. What's inappropriate is turning this sacred hall of justice into your personal stage for hatred." His words struck with the precision of a hammer, each syllable chipping away at the judge's authority. Camille felt her chest swell with emotions she could barely name. Just minutes ago, she had been suffocating beneath the weight of despair, sentenced to life without a flicker of hope. Now, standing beside her husband, she felt something entirely different, vindication. Every time Jonathan spoke, she could feel the scales tipping, the room shifting in her favor. It wasn't just his status as mayor that gave him power, it was the unshakable truth in his voice, the unwavering love in the way he refused to let go of her hand. The crowd's murmurs grew bolder. Some people shouted their support. Others jeered at the judge, their faith in the system shattered before their eyes. It was as though years of silent suspicion about corruption had finally been given a face, a moment that made it undeniable. Jonathan leaned closer to Camille, speaking softly enough that only she could hear, his tone full of fire. "This is it. This is the moment the whole city sees the truth. They can't hide it anymore." His words lit something inside her, a flicker of courage that had nearly died out during the long, lonely nights leading up to this day. The judge's face twisted, his voice cracking as he tried to regain ground. "This proceeding is adjourned. Remove them both." But his command was met with hesitation. The bailiff glanced between the mayor and the cameras, his hands twitching nervously but his feet unmoving. No one dared drag the city's leader and his wife out of the room under the unrelenting gaze of the press. Jonathan seized the moment. "You see, even your own officers know this charade has gone too far. You've lost the very authority you abuse. And I promise you, Judge Randall, this will not end with a gavel strike. This will end in a full investigation." The room erupted again, a cacophony of cheers, shouts, and the frantic buzz of journalists calling their editors. The judge sat frozen, his robe suddenly looking less like a symbol of power and more like a costume unraveling under the spotlight. Camille, tears streaming freely down her face now, no longer tried to hide her emotions. For the first time, she didn't feel like a victim being dragged by forces stronger than herself. She felt like a woman standing at the center of change, with her husband as both shield and sword beside her. She looked at Jonathan, her voice trembling but clear enough to be heard by him over the commotion. "You came for me." He squeezed her hand tighter, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'll always come for you. They thought they could silence you, but they just gave us the loudest stage in the city. The cameras flashed again, capturing the moment, the mayor and his wife united in defiance, their hands clasped like a vow. What had started as an unjust sentence had turned into a public reckoning. And though Camille knew the fight wasn't over, she could already feel the tide turning. For the first time since the nightmare began, she believed she would walk free. Not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been crushed by the same system. The judge had tried to bury her, but instead, he had unearthed a revolution.